Mitchell Warren from AVAC, and delighted to welcome so many people on from so many places to give you an update. Hopefully many of you will have been part of part one of this series in webinars related to a project that we've been undertaking now for a couple of years, and this is a further update on that. Before I get into the substance, let me just say we've muted the line to keep it clear so that we can record it and post this along with the slides that you'll see on the web for future reference for yourselves or colleagues, and we'll be sending out a notice when that is up. But we do want to hear from people, and if you are on the web interface, you can enter questions into the chat feature at any point. We'll put those in the queue as we go. You also can email avac@avac.org at any point if you'd like, and we will again put those in the queue. And there will be moments in the call where we want to hear from people live, and we'll give instructions on how to unmute your line at that point, and then mute your line again after asking a question. So that is pretty much how we will run the call. In terms of the substance, I'm delighted to welcome a number of colleagues who have been deeply involved in a body of work over the last couple of years to expand our collective knowledge in how we might understand and improve prevention programs for adolescent girls and young women. This is an area that is interesting, I think, to all of us on the line, and there are many different projects, and we hope that this one adds additional information for all of us to consider in the work going forward. In addition, we will hear an update, assuming that she joins. I think, Mary, are you on the line now? I think I just saw your name pop up. And Mary, if you are, you can hit *7 to unmute if you're on the phone as well.
I am on the line. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So we're going to provide a very quick background on an overall project called the HIV Prevention Market Manager. I'm then going to ask my friend and colleague Mary Aikenhead from the Gates Foundation to set the stage a bit to this concept of segmentation and what we mean by that. And then we'll get into the heart of the matter with colleagues working with Final Mile and partners on a broad human-centered design program. And again, many of you will have heard the qualitative results last year. We'll be updating today the quantitative results and the segmentation, and then conclude with what does it all mean and where do we go next. So that's kind of the run of show. As I said, this overall human-centered design project sits within a project, the HIV Prevention Market Manager project, with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we're very grateful. Mary, who's our project officer for the overall project, is on the call and will give you some additional insights, as I say, on segmentation. But with her support and the Foundation's support, AVAC, along with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, have embarked on a 5-year program. We're now just over halfway through on really looking at how we think about the overall marketplace for prevention, not just individual products. In that process, a slide that I think many of you have seen before, thinking about the process from not just research and development, but all the way through to delivery. And the market manager focuses on the 5 areas that are described here. First, perhaps I'll outline what's below the orange chevrons from R&D to delivery. And that is work that is trying to both improve new products in development in terms of trying to improve and inform the development process. Certainly also trying to accelerate introduction of existing prevention products. Obviously oral PrEP top amongst them, and Dapivirine ring following, and hopefully in the future long-acting cabotegravir. So a product orientation for the R&D pipeline. But to do that well, of course, there are 2 other bodies of work at the very bottom. One is to understand the funders of prevention programs, ministries of health, bilateral funders, multilateral funders, and then really trying to ensure global coordination. But at the heart of our work, and I think collectively in this field we've all really come to learn and appreciate the value and an essential need to put the user at the very center. So you can see at the very top of this that all of the bodies of work, whether it's product specific or product agnostic in terms of understanding the prevention landscape and improving coordination, all has to begin with the user in mind. Another way to see that, and again to outline a bit about how the Prevention Market Manager project is set up, is again putting people very much at the center of this work and seeing how the different areas of ministries, product developers, funders, and implementers can inform. And it's really through that lens that we look at all of our work, again, whether product agnostic or product specific. There are a number of issues that we are looking at within the Market Manager project, and the slide here really looks at our approach that looks at least 4 areas of the landscape. And you can see here, these are not the only ones, but 4 priorities about the users, about oral PrEP, about long-acting cabotegravir, and about next-generation products. In each of them, what we've tried to do is look at what is the fundamental challenge today, sitting in 2019, what are the risks of inaction or not addressing it effectively, and what is our response, and then what we hope to do by the end of 2020. I'm not, you'll be happy to know, going to take you through all 4 of these landscape views, but I did want to just really set the stage for this call by orienting people to our focus on the users of prevention. So obviously the challenge is how do we make sure that not only do products work in clinical trials, but that they will be used and have public health impact. The risk, of course, is that we could find product developers and funders developing a range of options that don't get used. And as one of the great vaccine pioneers said many years ago, a safe and effective vaccine that sits on the shelf is neither safe nor effective. And that very much is our view here. If we don't act on addressing this challenge, the risk is that we develop products that never get used. Our response and our progress to date, again, many of you hopefully will have seen the qualitative data, and it was in the link with the slides and webinar recording from that call. Out of that qualitative analysis, we developed a journey framework or a map to really try to understand what might be or could be, and you'll see some updates on that today in this call, what might be a perspective of a young woman trying to navigate through that, given that this is not clearly a linear perspective on prevention. And then we've just completed the quantitative data to really look at the segments, and that's really the focus of today's call. And then you can see a series of additional bodies of work, a discrete choice experiment, and then a range of prototyping of potential tools to help overcome some of those challenges as we go forward over the next year. So that is really meant to help orient people to the overall project, and hopefully to give you a sense that it's not just about the body of work you'll see today, but it's embedded very much in a more comprehensive view of how do we put all of these pieces together. So I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Mary Aikenhead, who is a Senior Project Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with a long track record in marketing and program design and implementation in a range of product areas before getting to the foundation, and has been working with us and a number of other partners in really trying to help make these ideas actionable in HIV prevention programs. And so I'm going to turn over to Mary to give a sense of why segmentation, this term that is on the slide that you see now, why it matters. And with that, I'll turn it to you, Mary.
Great. Thanks, Mitchell. I'll do the quick check. Can everybody hear me? Or can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. So why segmentation? It's a pretty straightforward answer. To have the most impact and to be the most effective with any given product or intervention, we want to be able to reach the people that we need to reach, who are going to be most impacted by using that product or taking up that behavior. And people are not the same. That's the sort of very, very simple, straightforward answer. And we talked in this case for this particular area for HIV prevention. We've been talking a lot about the need for adolescent girls and young women to use prevention products or to behave in ways that will help prevent them acquiring HIV. And adolescent girls and young women are a very varied bunch. So demographic information alone, saying a 15 to 19-year-old who maybe is in school, isn't in school, lives in this place, is really just not enough to design good programs and good products. So I have a little example here, totally different than what we're going to be talking about today. You can think about, and if you knew that you wanted to reach, these are pretty specific, right? A white male born in 1948 who was raised in England with his parents and 3 or more siblings, who's divorced, in a second marriage, has grown children, 2 or more, is successful, a millionaire, very prominent public figure, spends his winter holidays in the Alps, likes dogs, and you could think, well, that is so specific. Of course we could target this person, right? Next slide. In fact, you could end up with Prince of Wales or Ozzy Osbourne, and you'd probably want to design different products for one versus the other, because they're clearly not the same at all. And that's really what segmentation gives you. It combines not just demographic information, but also attitudes, behaviors, psychographic, social information. I mean, it gets you into people at a much deeper level so that you can design your programs and your products in a more accurate way. You can go right on to the next slide. I'm going to be very quick. And so there's a few things to think about when you think about a segmentation and how you think about grouping individuals in, you already choose a group, whether it is white men from England who are over 48, or whether it is adolescent girls and young women from KZN and Mpumalanga who are 15 to 24. But once you have that population, you divide them into groups, and you're really looking based on attitudes, behaviors, psychographics, demographics. There can be other characteristics that are used to actually divide the particular group into smaller segments. But the three things are pretty key. The groups need to be distinct. This has no overlap in the segments. There may be a small amount, but you want the segments to be pretty distinct from each other, because otherwise you haven't got different segments. They need to be identifiable. You need to be able to find and know when you see a group. You have a sense, oh, this is that particular group. And it's pretty interesting when you see these come to life, and I think you'll see it through the presentation that will follow. You'll start to get a sense of like, oh, I know somebody like that. And you start to actually, you can almost, not necessarily visually, you might need to talk to them or ask a few questions, but you get a pretty good sense pretty quickly what group somebody is in if you have a good segmentation. You can also describe them very easily. There's some quick and easy sort of catch-alls that will give you a sense of which segment somebody is in when you have a good segmentation where the segments are very distinct from each other. They need to be meaningful, so you don't want to make segments that are not relevant to whatever it is you're trying to do. And again, I think you'll find that the team who's going to present now have done a really good job finding very, very relevant attitudes and behaviors to group these segments based on HIV prevention or things associated with HIV prevention, what really matters to these segments that could then be tapped into in order to design for HIV prevention. They also need to be actionable. So you need to understand what to do with each of these segments in order to reach them and in order to have the impact that you're trying to have. But these are probably, there are other dimensions on which to segment groups when you're doing a segmentation, but you do generally want them to be distinct, meaningful, and actionable in order to have the impact that you do the segmentation for in the first place. And that's what I have. I'll pass it back, I think, to Mitchell, but I'm not sure.
Great. No, Mary, that's perfect. Thank you. So grateful. It is not often on an AVAC webinar that we get to see both Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne, and I think a really fantastic demonstration of why demographics aren't enough. So super helpful and exciting. I'm seeing that a few people might have had a little trouble hearing Mary. I hope that the next set of speakers will be clear, though, as we go forward, because I'm now delighted to turn it over to 2 colleagues who are working with Final Mile, an organization that we've brought in leading the behavioral, economic, and human-centered design work that is leading to the segmentation that Mary alluded to. Alok Gangarani is with Final Mile, as is Cindy Washington in South Africa, and I'm delighted to turn it over to both Alok and Cindy to walk us through. Again, as I do turn it over, I want to encourage people, if you do have questions for Mary or for Alok and Cindy as they go, please feel free to pop them into the box, and we'll put them in the queue, and we will get to those as we go. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Alok and Cindy.
Thanks, Mitchell. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's nice and clear.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is Alok Gangaramani, and what I will do is I'll jump straight into this project, this particular body of work that we are here to talk about today. So So broadly, there are three questions that we are focusing on in this project. And the first two are what we're going to talk about today. The third question is something that we're actually currently working on. So the first one basically is, and these two are what you might call as a user-centered research, right? So we're trying to understand how adolescent girls and young women are making decisions. We also want to understand how they might be different from each other, and what does that mean from a targeting perspective. The third question, which is about how might we reach them, is essentially the strategy effort that will fall into the human-centered design and piloting solutions, which is an effort that we are currently going on with. So next slide, Levi. So quickly giving you a status on the project, right? So as you can see, the one that is highlighted today, which is the quant research segmentation, that falls right in the middle of the project, and there are still more phases to go. What we have done so far was we did a fair bit of qualitative research before we even got here. And what you're going to see here then would be a kind of a combination of the two research outputs. What's coming next is focusing on product preferences, which is looking at basically how might these segments vary in terms of their preferences for different kinds of products, HIV prevention products. And then we get into the integrated strategy and then the HCD phase, which is where we'll get into how might we reach them, what kind of interventions can we develop, etc. So that's coming. That's the next remaining part of this year and early next year. Next slide. So the quant segmentation, the entire project, I'll take a step back. The entire project was focused on specifically on high-risk adolescent girls and young women, right? So we are not necessarily looking at the entire population, looking at a subset of the population. And so the criteria that we had for the research for both qualitative and quantitative was that we are going to focus on certain districts which have a fairly high prevalence rate. So the number that we kind of came down to was 15% or higher, and we were looking at specifically these two provinces, the KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga, and it essentially boiled down to these 7 districts that you see on the screen. And then even within these districts, when we were going to recruit participants or run research with participants, we were focusing on AGYW, or adolescent girls and young women, who have had unprotected sex over the past 6 months, and they've had either one partner who might have other partners, or they themselves have had 2 or more partners over the past 6 months. So that was an additional selection criteria we had. So as you can see, we had a very specific focus for the entire research, and this is pretty much for what we did in qualitative as well as the quantitative one. Next slide.
Alok, you just were fading out there. I don't know if you're moving away from your microphone, but if you could stay on it, we could hear you earlier, but much better.
Is this okay?
Thanks. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. So, like I said, what you're seeing here is a combination of both the qualitative and quantitative. So, there were certain big, broadly context level insights that I'll first get into, and this kind of influences this entire conversation as well as the research design for the quantitative phase. So there are a few quick big points that I want to make before we get into the segmentation aspect. Next slide. So when we started this project, one of the first, when we were going in, right, we went in with this thinking that we want to understand the HIV prevention journey of adolescent girls and young women. So we had this framework. We said, okay, perhaps the journey looks like something like, they become aware of prevention products, or methods, and then, they start kind of committing towards it, they then adopt it, and eventually they kind of adhere or sustain it. So that's kind of broadly a linear journey that you might think of, right? And very, very quickly we realized that it's not a journey that exists from the perspective of the women themselves. In fact, the entire decision making when we start looking from their perspective is one that is focused on relationship management, right? So and that's really guiding their decision making around everything. And relationship management itself is a fairly complex term, right? So it focuses on not just about how I manage my relationships. It's about how might I preserve it, how might I navigate different power balances, how might I negotiate usage of condoms, and etc., how much trust I have, how much control I have. So there's a lot of variables within this entire decision-making context that's influencing the entire decision-making and also influencing their prevention behaviors. So if you start thinking from a human-centered point of view, a human-centered design point of view, you really want to make sure that you are considering this entire relationship management aspect and not just HIV prevention. And you will see when we get into segmentation that this is something that we considered very strongly when we are starting to look at the different segments of these women. Next slide. Now, if we start thinking of prevention, and we kind of narrow it down our focus there, we also realize, right, that prevention itself is not just about taking pills. It's not just about taking condoms from a woman's perspective. It's not an isolated behavior. It is something that includes things like negotiation, selection of partners, how might I deal with gifts, gift giving, etc. So there's a lot of social and interpersonal context that guides prevention behavior. And even when we start thinking of, how much are the women itself motivated when it comes to prevention, that's not something that is consistent. Right? So you might be motivated when you enter a new relationship where you don't necessarily have a high degree of trust. But as you start establishing trust in the man, you stop actually worrying about prevention. You start thinking that maybe it's safe, and that motivation kind of goes down. So it's a very temporary motivation and not something that stays with you. At the same time, the risk that you might feel when it comes to your sexual health also occurs in what we had called blips of risk, right? So it's something that you might feel at some point of your time. Say, for example, you get a physical reaction like a rash, but other times there is no risk that you feel for yourself, for your sexual health. So you're not necessarily saying motivation and risk one coming together. Neither are they consistent in the journey of a woman. And the other thing about prevention is the fact that it's very, very neutral, right? So it's not, when you think of a treatment and you go through like a pill regimen, right, you get an immediate feedback. You start taking pills, your body starts feeling better, and you realize that there is something going on. But from a prevention standpoint, there is absolutely no reward. It's a very, very neutral focus. So when we start thinking of habits, right, that we are trying to build a prevention habit, a new lifestyle habit amongst these women, we need to think beyond the standard thinking of, that a habit needs a reward because they don't necessarily exist in this particular context. Next slide. And we also focused a lot on understanding, what kind of habits exist as of today. And broadly, as we think of the journey of an adolescent girl and a woman, you start seeing about 3 habit loops. And that's kind of what's described on the right side of this slide. So the first loop that we call here is the unstable, externally focused, unhealthy habit loop. It's basically the kind of loop, the habits that we are seeing for the most part. This is where we are seeing where most women are falling. What we mean by unstable and externally focused is the fact that these are not consistent, right? So their behaviors change, and largely it's because it's dependent not on their own priorities, but the priorities of the man, right? So if the man wants to test, or the man wants to use condom because he's worried, his priorities tend to overpower their own decision making. So it's kind of inconsistent. So if my partner changes, my behaviors change, right? And it's largely unhealthy, and unhealthy, it's basically the fact that it's not something that is keeping them safe, right? So that's one big behavior that we are seeing that's kind of very, very prevalent amongst all segments of women that we have seen. The second one is what we call the unstable but more internally focused. So this is where you are seeing a shift from prioritization, where you're no more prioritizing your partner's goals, but actually now thinking of your own sexual health goals, your own relationship goals. And there's a small subset of women that we saw were going through. It's still inconsistent. That's why we call it unstable, which means that there's not necessarily that they're using prevention method every time, but at least there is a change in the orientation on what you want to prioritize. Then the last one is the stable, internally focused, healthy habit, and this is kind of where you want everyone to be, right? So this is the place where they are consistently following a prevention regimen, and because of the way we are set up, the way we are recruiting in this particular research, there are very, very few women who actually reached this particular state of habit behaviors. Okay, next slide. So I've talked about journey a little bit, and I think in the past qualitative outputs also we had it kind of laid out kind of a framework of the journey of adolescent girls and women. So I'm going to very briefly talk about it today because you'll start seeing it kind of integrating with the segmentation once we get there. So on this slide, the green arrow boxes that you're seeing are essentially the 5 stages of journey, right? So shaping my opinion, reality check, all these are essentially 5 different stages that we think a woman is kind of going through. They do play out differently for different segments, and we'll talk about it later. But these are kind of broadly the 5 stages. Between 2 stages is what you see a milestone. So, for example, opinion formed, which is which has a blue background. That's kind of a milestone that you see that is reached at the end of first stage, and then you kind of get to the second stage and so on. So the way this is structured is in the first stage we are talking about a woman who is listening to a lot of things about relationships. How do you deal with relationships? How do you keep yourself safe? So there's a lot of information that she's gathering, and then she eventually reaches a milestone of opinion form where she said, okay, this is what means to me, but this is what my relationship goals should be. This is how I'm going to deal with my partners, and this is how I'll keep myself safe if that's a priority. Right, so that's kind of the opinion form stage that you hit, and then you move to the second phase of your journey, and that's the reality check. So once you've formed your opinions and you're actually kind of testing it in real life, you realize that not everything that you thought of is true. Right. So for example, you might think that you have an exclusive relationship with your partner, and then you realize, no, my partner is actually having multiple partners. Or you realize the partner has been cheating on me all this while. He's not actually being loyal or honest with me. So there are a lot of reality checks these women are going through, and that kind of leads them to what we might call as forming new resolutions. Now, I think of these new resolutions as the kinds that I might create. So, at the start of the year, we all form resolutions that, we'll eat well, we'll eat healthy. And of course, that's really not something that we are able to consistently follow. So that's kind of what New resolution is. Not the highest quality resolution. It's something that is very, very reactive based on the reality check that you've just gone through. And then you start re-evaluating relationships, which is not a bad place, because now you're starting to think that, maybe everything that I'm going through, all my resolutions are not really working. I need to rethink how my relationships are getting formed, except that I'm still prioritizing my partner's goals over myself. So when I'm doing this re-evaluation exercise, I'm still putting my partner's priorities over mine, or my relationship priorities over my own sexual health priorities. That's what we call as largely externally focused. Now, at some point, you see this massive orientation shift, and we are kind of trying to capture that as what we call as a big flip. So what we mean by flip is essentially that your orientation is moving from one that is externally focused to now one that is internally focused. So you're seeing some of the women who are able to transition out of this focus on, relationship is everything, or my partner's goals are more important to, I need to start thinking of myself, I need to start thinking of my sexual health. And that's an orientation shift that they kind of go through, and they start forming or start developing habits, right? So this kind of links back to the earlier point on moving from an unstable habit loop, which is externally focused, to one that is internally focused. And at some point, there are a few women who are able to actually now align their lifestyle with these habits, and now are able to kind of sustain and evolve those habits as their life changes. So the final stage, which is the fifth stage, is what that kind of captures that. It's probably the stage that we found the fewest women who have reached, and it's obviously the most difficult one because this is a place where they are actually able to sustain a clinically healthy lifestyle. So that kind of broadly gives you these 5 stages, and like I said, there are also 3 different kind of habit behaviors. So the next slide is kind of captures the two concepts together. So basically what this means is this, right? So you have your 5 stages on top, and then you have these 3 habit loops. And the habit loop, which was the unstable, externally focused, is what you're seeing in stage 3. And then the other 2 habit loops kind of come into stage 4 and 5. Now, why is this all important, right? Why do we need to kind of understand all this? Why do we need to understand these stages? That's a question that you might consider. So the way we see it is if they are women that we are seeing in this journey, then you obviously need to kind of talk to them differently. You kind of have to move them along very differently. And our goals should also vary. So, for example, in stages 1 and 2, I think the most important thing that we might want to focus on is how might we prevent people to form unstable habits to start with, right? Is there anything that we can do at that stage so they don't even reach this place of unstable habit? Now, women who are actually already here, how do we then break those unstable habits, break those externally focused habits into one that is more internally focused? So basically move them along from stage 3 to stage 4. And the women that are in stage 4, how do we then kind of sustain them through this journey? So the focus essentially keeps changing based on the stage that the woman is in. And we're also kind of trying to test tools and ways to understand where a woman might be. So we'll talk a little bit about it later in the presentation, but essentially the kind of typing tools and outputs that we are creating out of this research is also trying to identify where the woman might be across these stages. So so that's kind of captures the journey and the habit behavior. Next slide. We'll now get into the kind of the meat of the discussion, which is a segmentation piece, right? So we conducted this research, like I said, with over 2,000 women, and which are very, very high risk focused. So again, we're talking about a subset of population here, and we kind of arrived at 3 segments. And these basically 3 segments are organized based on their needs and their goals. So the way we have labeled them is based on what the their top goals from a relationship aspect. This goes back to the kind of the first one that I made, that relationship management still continues to be the priority, the key decision-making driver of these women. So the first one is the lifestyle seeker. So this is a woman whose primary primary goals are about aligning her relationships with her lifestyle ambitions. You might, and she is kind of the smallest segment of the group. You might think of these women as those who are actually care up for the good things in life, who are trying to achieve certain lifestyle goals that they have set for themselves, and they might be obviously influenced by others around them. The second one is what we call as the affirmation seeker, and this is a group that is more focused on, they have emotional needs, and they also have a lot of social validation needs. So they want the relationships and friends and peers who are constantly giving them some level of confidence and validation in terms of the decisions they're making. And the third one is the respect seeker, and which is interesting, and we'll talk about a little more nuance in terms of what respect means in this particular context. But this is a third group of women for who relationship that kind of give her a feeling of respect, a feeling of some level of equality. And we're not talking about equality as in men and women are equal. That's not necessarily where they are coming from. But that's kind of, and we'll talk about the nuance when it comes to respect. But you see that there's a different, very, very, very different goal for this particular group of women. So, these are the 3 segments. The next slide essentially now kind of captures how they might be different from each other. So before we get into a little more detail about at each segment, this might give you an orientation of how they are not the same and what are the key parameters by which they are differing, right? So that's one of the things that Mary was talking about, that there needs to be meaningful difference between the three segments. And on the left side that you see are 4 things that can broadly be considered as differentiating variables here, right? So you're talking about relationship expectations, power balance, the perceived HIV risk, and the emotional response to HIV. So these are like 4 key variables where you're seeing a stark difference amongst these 3 segments. So let's just go through them one by one. So relationship expectations, this is essentially where we were asking the woman in terms of, what do you want from a partner? What are your key relationship goals? And amongst these 3, you see that for a lifestyle seeker, a majority of them, gifts and material needs stand out. That's one of the things that were very, very important for them for any relationships. Whereas when you get to affirmation seeker and respect seeker, you see that affirmation seeker is looking for more emotional validation, a feeling of safety, a feeling of desirability, whereas a respect seeker is completely different. The majority of them want someone who can actually respect their views, respect the decisions. So this is a fundamental kind of a difference between the 3 segments. The next one, which is focused on power balance, this is a place where we are asking women in terms of, who decides when to have sex, who has a decision-making in terms of, using condoms, and how does your partner react when you are trying to use condom. And you can see that there's a very stark difference, again, in the power balance here, where for a lifestyle seeker, majority of them have kind of almost ceded that decision-making completely to their partner. And it's almost more like a trade-off that they're making. It's not saying that they don't have agency. It's more about the fact that they've made this trade-off. They have made a choice that they want that decision-making to go to the partners. And as you go along between the affirmation seeker and respect seeker, you start seeing that changing, right? So it's no more the majority. With respect seeker, it's actually the lowest in terms of they seem to be having the most control and negotiating power in their decisions. The third one is perceived HIV risk, and this is kind of where you're talking to them, how risky do you think you are as compared to other women in the community? And it's interesting how these play out very differently in the 3 segments. Only a minority of lifestyle seeker segment believe that they are less likely to have risk. So they seem to be more realistic about the fact that they are actually at high, that there's a good chance that they might get HIV. When it comes to affirmation seeker, about half of them feel that they are less likely. Respect seeker kind of stands out because they almost are overconfident. They don't think they are at lower risk. And again, just a reminder, these are all high-risk women. So these are all women that are not using protected condoms, or are not necessarily having single relationships, or they may have partners that are having multiple partners. So all 3 of them are at high risk from an objective standpoint. But respect seeker comes across as a woman who thinks that she's actually not as high risk. Finally, the emotional response to HIV was also very interesting and different between these 3 segments. So this is kind of where we were asking them, what's your reaction to HIV? What do you think about HIV? And we almost looked at 2 combination emotions, right? So almost like their top 2 emotional responses towards HIV and HIV prevention. And from a lifestyle seeker perspective, the 2 emotions that came together were scared and being hopeless. And it's an interesting combination because you are scared of something and you may or may not want to do something about it. But if you're also feeling hopeless about it, that tells us that you do not really know what to do about it. So you are worried about HIV, but you don't really have an action plan. You don't even know that there's anything that you can really do about changing the dynamic of getting HIV. When you go to affirmation seeker, it's a very different combination. So they didn't seem to be the ones who are highly scared, but their emotions were still hopeless and confusion, which almost sounds like a place where you want to avoid even thinking about HIV. And it's something that you actually see a lot with this particular segment. The third group is interesting because they're also scared, or they're also fearful about HIV, but at the same time they're angry. And that combination is kind of different to the lifestyle seeker combination because anger typically means that you're willing to do something about it. You actually want to act on it, and maybe you want to change the situation, the same change the outcome. So they may be more likely to do something when it comes to preventing themselves from HIV as compared to the other three. So yeah, this kind of gives you broadly an idea of the three segments. We're now going to get into each segment, and we'll kind of look at them into a little more detail. So I'm going to invite Cindy to introduce the segment. The first one being the lifestyle seeker.
Thank you, Alok, and good day to everyone listening from all over the world. And again, thank you to my team for just allowing me the opportunity to share some of these stories from these brains.
Cindy, sorry to interrupt. As you get started, it's so great to hear your voice, but if you could do it a little bit louder or closer to the phone so we can be sure everyone can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Mitch. I hope that's a little bit better for everybody. Can you hear me better?
That's better. Keep it up.
Okay, fantastic. So again, thank you, Alok, and good day to everyone who's listening in from all over the world. And thank you for the team for allowing me to be able to share some of the stories that we've heard from the various adolescent young girls and young women living in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga. These stories, I find them to be quite brave and honest. And they're about young women just trying to fulfill their goals, finding agency, finding power, and more than anything, living out their truth. So now I would like us to share a story from the field. And I would really like us to first maybe imagine a young girl. I would like to really encourage you to imagine this young girl and think of various girls that maybe you've seen, girls you've observed, young women that you've encountered or interacted with in your own life, spoken with, shared with. I mean, all of these connections and relations that really embody encounters that you've personally had with young girls. I think these will really help us to really begin to imagine and tie together the tapestry of what really expresses these young girls that are living here in South Africa. Let's start with the life seeker. There are many narratives that really embody who she is and what she's about. So I'll share some of their truths and some of their thoughts and feelings. So who is she? She is that ambitious, passionate, hardworking, adventurous, risk-taking young girl. She's energetic, she's full of life, and she has great hopes and dreams for herself. And I'm sure we all have come across young women that are like that are go-getters, and they want the most for their lives, and they have great hopes about the things that they're able to achieve for themselves, for their family, for their siblings, and for their community. So let me tell you a little story about a life seeker. She grows up in a community, she grows up in a family, possibly maybe she has lost her father, and she grows up in a one-headed household where her mother is taking care of her. Or maybe perhaps she doesn't have any parents and she's lost both her parents and she's being raised by her grandma. And in both of the situations, you find that maybe her grandma gets attention and her mother is a domestic worker. And she probably comes from a family with maybe a few siblings, maybe a family that's a big family with many cousins that she shares her life with. Her aunts and sisters and cousins that she's able to share her life with. But she's raised in this environment and this family, and maybe the only income we hear we're talking about is a government grant or her mother who is a domestic worker. But despite the challenges and struggles that she encounters, some of the suffering and the feeling of lack that she feels in her life, she still is able to kind of summon up some ambition and hope and promise for herself in her life. And she promises herself that she will never live a life that is going to be like the life that she has been raised in. She promises her siblings that she will work hard in her life to be able to help them to progress and be successful in terms of her own life standing and the life standing of her siblings and of her community. She's looking for a life where she can find dignity. She's looking for a life where she can find vision to be able to fulfill her goals and to fulfill her dreams. So what does this mean for the types of relationships that she looks for? This means that she chooses partners that can help her to achieve her life goals. She chooses partners that are also ambitious and are also hardworking. And she chooses partners that also want the best for their lives and for her life as well. So perhaps she starts dating a lovely young man in her community, someone who is like-minded as her, who is also a hardworking, ambitious go-getter. And she starts a relationship with this young man, and she has a relationship with him for a few years, maybe a few months. But as the relationship progresses, she finds that even though she may find emotional fulfillment, but in various ways the relationship could be holding her back from being able to attain the material goals that she needs in her life. So perhaps the same young girl who is in this emotionally fulfilling relationship happens to meet an older man one night when she's out with her friends having fun. And, he's in a committed relationship. He's not looking for a long-term relationship with her. But meeting this older man opens up for her the opportunity to be able to say, I might be able to assist you with being able to help you send your siblings to a better school. Or maybe for her, this could be an opportunity for her to maybe open up her opportunity to maybe further job employment, or maybe a trip to the city where she can maybe start applying for work, or maybe open up her ability to apply for scholarships for school. So this man represents for her the opportunity and the willingness that he has to be able to meet her goals. And perhaps in the same vein or in the same time, she meets another man who also is admirable of her and gives her gifts and clothes and shoes, and she's able to look the part. She's able to feel dignified because the feeling of lack that she's had from not being able to afford many things in her life, this man is able to give her the material positions that she needs to be able to begin to look the part, to become the woman that she wants to be able to attain the goals that she wants. So her view on sexual relationships is a view where sexual relationships are a tool for her. They are an ability for her to network, to connect, and further her own goals and her own ambitions. And multiple partners for her means more benefits, closer to my goals, closer to my dreams, closer for me to be able to attain all of the hopes and dreams that I have been holding close to my heart. And so she's a risk taker. She takes any opportunity that comes for her to be able to progress and propel herself in life. And new partner means new opportunity. And so these young women are women that have great hopes and have great dreams for themselves, but their ability to be able to negotiate power and agency in relationships and be able to negotiate protection in a sexual relationship with these multiple partners is reduced. Because ultimately her main goal in this relationship is how can I use this relationship as a tool for me to be able to progress and for me to be able to achieve the goals that I've set for in my life. Now, as you continue to imagine this young girl, I would also like to just invite Alok to help me continue this narrative, the story of these life seekers. And let's take a closer look at some of the other driving factors of who they are and what they want, and how this translates to the decisions that they make, to partners that they have. Alok, I'd like to invite you back in. Next slide, please.
Yep.
And Cindy, we were losing you quite a bit at the end, but go ahead, Alok, and we'll hopefully get back on track.
Yep. So I think the key point, like Cindy was saying, is that for a lifestyle seeker, relationship is a means to an end. And essentially, what I'm going to quickly run by some of those factors, right? So her relationships are functionally driven. There are certain lifestyle goals that she has, and she's using the relationship as a tool to get there. And that's kind of what you're seeing as her majority responses. Like I mentioned, she's the one who's kind of ceding control of her decision making to her partners. She's one amongst all the three segments. She's most concerned about her partner getting angry if she kind of even tries to negotiate condom usage with him. Next slide. And when we get into the risk perceptions, again, I had talked about the fact that this is a group that has a relatively, amongst the three, the highest perception of risk. They actually think that they might be more at risk as compared to others. That said, it may still be underestimated. They probably are not estimating as much as the risk as they should. And one of the things that, because their relationships are functionally driven, they are less, this is one group that stands out in terms of how concerned they are about transmitting HIV to others or partners, right? So when we talk about emotional responses to HIV, they are not very concerned with transmitting it to the partners. I mean, that kind of goes in line with the fact that they're less emotionally driven and a lot more functionally driven in their relationships. Next slide. This particular is interesting, and it also varies quite well between the three segments. So when we look at their experiences in terms of the number of partners they have, you see that the lifestyle seeker is one segment that tends to have a higher than average, higher number of partners as compared to the other two. They're more likely to have more than one partner over the past 6 months. They also tend to have a much higher age gap, which we know is correlated with risk in general. Amongst the three segments, they also tend to be a lot more risk-taking, a lot more impulsive, something that Cindy again was telling in her story. And you see that one way they are expressing control or agency then is not by negotiating with partners, but more like by changing partners. So if the partner is not meeting their needs, they are more likely to look for another partner who will help them satisfy their goals. Next slide. We had talked about journey earlier, so what you see here are like the top factors that might be influencing her progression in those 5 stages of journey that I had earlier talked about. So on the left are essentially things that are holding her back, and on the right, which are driving her forward, are the ones that kind of enable her to move forward behaviorally in the journey. But I think the main point here is the fact that her primary need, the kind of support that she's looking for, that we might need to provide her, is how might she achieve her lifestyle goals, how might she select partners that might help her achieve those goals without necessarily compromising her health. And that's kind of really the key need or the key driving implication for this particular segment. So this kind of covers lifestyle seeker. Let's go to the next segment, next slide, and I'll invite Cindy again to kind of introduce us to the segment.
Thank you, Alok. And again, I would like us to continue to imagine these young women, but now I would like to move over and share more stories or more narratives around the affirmation seeker. And so who is she? She is that young woman who is kind and she's caring, protective, but she's also very cautious about wanting to please her family and wanting to please the community and wanting to please her partner. She's very curious and creative, and she finds various ways to view the world. Is really also seeking ways to really open up her life in ways that are modern and that are relevant towards the current lifestyle. So this young woman, some of them come from religious families, some of them come from traditional Zulu families, where the religion and the cultural tradition form the fabric of her identity and form the fabric of her morality. So what is religious to her or what is cultural to her in terms of shaping her identity, shaping her views of womanhood, shaping her views around sexuality, shaping her views on relationships. So how a socially constructed community it becomes really a pillar to how she sees herself and how she sees her place in this world. The affirmation seeker is many women. She could be that woman who has 2 children from the same father. And it's important for her to keep this relationship because in the community that she comes from, especially in the communities here in KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga, having the same partner is viewed or is looked upon in the community because having different partners or maybe having different fathers or children is frowned upon and looked down upon in the community. So she seeks affirmation in her community. She seeks affirmation from her partner by maintaining that relationship because it's through connects her and roots her to her religion or her culture. But she's also curious, and she's also wondering what else does the world have to offer her. She's also quite creative. So perhaps the same young woman whom in one way respects and her culture and her values and her religion, also is one woman that wants a little bit more from her life, something different, something exciting. So perhaps she meets another young man, or perhaps she has a part-time job where she meets other people, other like-minded people like herself. And in this relationship, she finds that he is more modern and he is more creative, and he affirms a part of her that is seeking to be connected into a different world, where she's not bound by obligations and commitments because of her culture and tradition, but she's able to express herself and be another type of woman that this other partner allows her to be. So the relationship she chooses, it means that relationships have to affirm her and affirm her place both in her community and her family, but also affirm some of the aspirations that she has for her life. So with this, what we begin to see with the affirmation piece is that her view of relationships are about security, fulfillment, stability, but they're also about expression and finding freedom in these almost two juxtaposed worlds that she is trying to live in. So oftentimes the decision making when it comes to sex and sexual partners is quite inconsistent. Sometimes she uses protection, sometimes she doesn't. But a lot of how she makes the decision is driven by her feelings of trust that are reinformed by the affirmation that she receives from her partner. And again, Alok, I'd like to invite you back in to really help us to unpack this young woman a bit further, to really see what kind of drives her and how does she negotiate these two worlds that she's placed in. How does she both find meaning and identity and fulfillment in one, but also the freedom to be herself and to be affirmed in another. Thank you, Alok.
Thanks, Cindy. So if you move to the next slide, and as Cindy essentially said, her relationships tend to be very emotionally driven, right? So this is a person who is looking for affirmation, validation, affection from her partners, from a social life, from a community. So that's one key goal that she has for relationships, and it's something that we saw. And when it comes to functional needs, those are actually severely discounted for this particular group. And like we said, from a power balance perspective, she is we see that she is one person who might be influenced by peers. She is ceding decision making to her partner to some extent, but it's still much better than what we saw in the lifestyle seeker. If you move to the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, this is a segment that is broadly thinking. Half of them think that their risk is similar or lower than other adolescent girls and young women. And because they are more emotionally driven, you see that this is a group that is more concerned about transmitting HIV to partners. They are more concerned about others than themselves. So it's slightly, again, different to what you see with the lifestyle seeker. Next slide. The sexual experience is interesting here because one of the things you see is she's, amongst all of the three segments, she's one that is most likely to have a single relationship or even a longer relationship. So while, of course, they also have had multiple partners, they are less likely to have multiple partners as compared to the other two segments. Her age gap is lower than, when it comes to with her partners, is lower than the lifestyle seeker. She is, however, impulsive. That kind of ties in with what Cindy was saying in terms of being creative. So she is risk prone from that angle, but she generally seems to be one who's looking for longer and sustainable relationships. Next slide. And we start thinking of things that are holding her back in terms of progressing through the journey. I think that one of the primary need, as you might have probably already guessed, is that this is one segment who's going to look for positive sources of affirmation, positive validation. She is likely to be influenced. So what's our key implication for this particular segment in that sense is how might we provide her that kind of affirmation and validation without, and also ensuring that she doesn't become vulnerable to, I guess, poor decision making. She is not, her decision making or her vulnerability for seeking this social norms, the social validation, doesn't lead her to making poor decisions. I'm going to invite Cindy back now for our last segment, the respect seeker, to give us an introduction of who this group is.
Thank you, Alok. And lastly, I would like us to talk about the respect seeker. So the respect seeker, who is she?
Cindy, I hate to interrupt your flow, but again, a little hard to hear you. So if you can get a little closer to the phone.
Alrighty. I hope you can hear me better now.
That is much better. Super strong.
Fantastic. Okay, that's great. Great. So yes, coming back to the respect seeker. She is that proactive young woman. She's smart, she's informed, she's confident. One of those young women described as saying lead skills in her community. She's probably one of those girls who's the captain of the netball team. Or maybe in high school she was part of the student representative council. Or maybe she's a leader in the choir and she sings at church. She finds herself in positions in life where she finds a voice, she finds agency, she finds power, and she's able to truly express this in various different ways. And she strongly believes in equality, and she strongly believes that each woman, especially in a relationship, has the power and the agency to be respected. And what does respect mean for her? It means various different things. There's respect culturally, there's respect in her family and community, and there's respect from her partner. So she tends to choose partners whom listen to her and treat her as an equal, whom she finds assurance and confidence in her ability to express herself. And she's the type of woman that oftentimes will take it very easy in a relationship. She's very patient. She takes her time because she wants to feel respected. She wants to feel that this person is in the relationship for the right reason and is committed. So relationships to her have a lot to do with self-actualization. Oftentimes you will find that with the respect seeker, they are looking for long-term relationships where they can build together, where they can have similar goals together. So she may have been dating a boyfriend from high school, and it's been many years that they've been together. In fact, in the community, they look up upon her. She is that girl that your mom or your grandmother or your brother or your sister makes an example of. She's the one that whom is loved because of how she carries herself. And for her, that is respect, being respected in her community through her behavior, what the adults see around her peers is a driving force for her. But sometimes she finds herself in a situation where her long-term boyfriend, whom she loves and whom she, great dreams and aspirations together, may still be young and reckless, and he may still make mistakes, and sometimes he may show a lack of commitment where she finds herself being disrespected. And this is where the possibility of another partner comes in. Another partner who is perhaps maybe older, is more mature, maybe he himself is in a committed relationship. So this other partner doesn't pose a threat to her current relationship because he's older and he's mature, and she can have more mature conversations with him, for instance. Doesn't feel disrespected by the possibility of him cheating with other women in her community. He provides that sense of security and stability where she feels herself to be respected in her community. So for the respect seeker, respect for her is very intertwined and it's expressed in various different levels. But more than anything, respect is about the power to make the right choice, to choose the right partner. And she chooses her partner very carefully. And this is where you find that she's quite overconfident because she feels that because of her character, this will allow it to attract the type of partners that are going to make the right decision and protect her, even if he does stay part of the relationship. But because he respects me, he will protect me. I would like to invite Alok again to help us unpack the respect speaker a little bit further. And in terms of just how this respect speaker, how she perceives risk in a relationship, how she's able to negotiate power and agency in her decision making around sex. Thank you, Alok.
Thanks, Cindy. So, yep. So when we talk about this particular segment, right, as Cindy said, she is driven by a desire for some kind of respect, that her opinions are valued. So that's something that starkly stands out for this particular group. Functional needs are not something that are very important. She tends to have a lot more control in terms of, when to have sex. She's less likely to have a partner who's abusive or who might get angry if she's trying to negotiate condom usage. So you see that standing out for this particular segment. Next slide. When it comes to risk perception, like we had talked about earlier, even though she is at high risk given her behaviors, she does feel that she is much lower as compared to others. Right? So that's a potential area of concern when you talk about this particular segment. At the same time, she is also equally concerned that if she gets HIV, then she might actually transfer to a partner. So there is some level of emotional involvement in the relationship. So amongst the group, she tends to be more worried about some of these things. Next slide. So what stands out for this particular group is the fact that she's the one person who's likely to delay her sexual debut, and she may actually also have more gaps between relationships because she is selective. As we talked about her partner, she thinks her most important thing, at least for her, is to make the right partner choice, which will give her the respect and also she feels will keep her safe. She's one group where we saw the lowest age gap amongst the three segments, and she seems to be the least impulsive amongst all of them. So in terms of risk taking, she might actually be the lowest amongst the three segments. So next slide. And again, thinking from a journey perspective, I think the big point here is she is one person who is confident, we know. And I think the support that she needs is to build on that confidence and ensuring that she starts prioritizing her sexual health instead of thinking that she's smart and she's not at risk. It's more about using the same confidence to negotiate in a relationship to make sure her health is prioritized over everything else. So that's one thing, one indication that we see for this particular segment. So I'll move to the next slide. And now this is just to kind of bring together the earlier discussions we had and the three segments, right? So essentially, this is again the journey on the top that we saw and some of the milestones that we had discussed. And now if you start seeing the three segments, and this kind of gives you an idea of how these three segments differ between them. So I don't intend to go through the entire slide, but if you start thinking of, the opinion formed as one milestone, you see that for a lifestyle seeker, the opinion is one where she thinks relationships are about gifts and functional material needs, whereas for a spec seeker, the opinion that she's forming is one about that relationships are about making good partner choices. So you see a very different kind of interpretation of the same milestone, and that's kind of how you want to look at this journey. And again, why is this important, right? It's important because if they are forming different kinds of opinions, if they are progressing through this journey very differently, which means that we have to give them different kind of support structure. We have to intervene differently for these three segments to make sure that we are able to help them progress in a positive manner. Next slide. We also did one quick exercise, and we're actually doing this again and kind of validating this. But the exercise that we did was trying to get a sense of, where are these women that we are talking to? Where are they in the journey, right? So we had a set of questions that helped us figure out which stage they might fall in. So this is kind of a quick output of, if you look at that flip, the big flip moment that I've talked about, so you see that you have majority of the women that are before the flip. So 60% of the women are falling before the flip, and only 40% have kind of progressed, right? So, and what does this mean from a programming or implication standpoint is that the first three stages where the women are, they may not even actually be ready for, adhering to a prevention product. So we might give them an oral PrEP and they might take it, but they're less likely to be able to stick to it simply because they're still prioritizing their partner. They're very, very externally focused. Whereas the women who are across this flip, they're probably more able and more likely to be able to do that. So if you start thinking from an implication standpoint, you see that we have to probably think of these before and after flip very differently. And 60% of the women are still before the flip, so that's obviously a big group. Like I said, we are testing this again and in this particular phase, and we are trying to see what might be the most accurate way to figure out which stages these women are falling in. But this is kind of an initial picture from the quant output. So next slide. So like I said, we're still reporting out the research outputs. We are moving into the strategy phase, but there are certain early indications that we thought we'll talk about today, but there's more to come, and this will be more specific. But there are four things that we have here, right? So the first one is from a communication standpoint. You can see that for a lifestyle seeker, because she has a little more a better view of her risk, a risk reduction based communication might actually work for her. Whereas from an affirmation seeker, one that is peer and social norm based, which provides her the validation, might be a better way to talk to her. Whereas as compared to a respect seeker, one that provides her confidence, that focuses on improving her self-efficacy, is probably a communication angle to take. From a product adoption, product usage perspective, we can see the lifestyle seeker might be less likely to adopt products that require extensive negotiation, given her power dynamics within the relationships. An affirmation seeker, for her product usage, might depend a lot on what her peers are doing in terms of the same product, whether her partner will like it, whether he'll approve of it. And a respect seeker might actually be one person who might be willing to negotiate product usage with a partner, given that she has more power in the relationship decision-making, especially sexual decision-making. From a delivery standpoint, if you start thinking of how we want to, what kind of services we should deliver and what might be important for them, for a lifestyle seeker, secrecy from partner might still continue to be an important factor, given that she's worried about making him angry. But whereas from an affirmation seeker, she's one who might need a lot more emotional support, again, something we've talked about. From a respect seeker, we might actually see a general skepticism from this group, who, because of their overconfidence, that they may not actually need prevention services, because she feels that she is not as much as compared to others. And finally, when we start thinking of from a support network standpoint, one that helps her prioritize lifestyle without necessarily compromising her sexual health is kind of support network that might be useful for lifestyle seeker. When you think of for an affirmation seeker, again, it goes back to emotional and social validation. And when it comes to respect seeker, it's about, how might we actually reframe this whole confidence and to driving ownership of HIV protection for herself, instead of trying to use the same confidence for better partners. It's about for her to start thinking of, I need to own my HIV protection. It's my responsibility. I need to do something about it. So that might be a reframe that she has to go through. This kind of brings us to the end of the research, the implications. I'm going to try and turn it over to Mitchell now to open up for Q&A.
That's fantastic. Alok and Cindy, thank you so much. That was absolutely terrific. And to see so much work and slides come alive through both of you, and particularly Cindy, to hear your providing voice to the three different segments. We've had some fantastic questions. We don't have a ton of time, but I want to get to them straight away, and then we're going to finish with my colleague Sean Malone giving a sense of what comes next. I do want to maybe just, one question came up just toward the end, someone asking a great question. Do you have boys and men's perspectives? And in fact, I didn't say at the outset, well, this body of work has gone on over the last 2 years. There's been a parallel project which Sean leads in his spare time. He splits his time between this body of work and managing a similar body of work focused on understanding many of the same kinds of issues for young men. That has been presented on a few webinars. It's done in partnership with PSI and Ipsos, and we will be sure when we update the links for the slides and recording here to provide you the slides and recordings of that as well. So I want to make sure that gets addressed. I do want to jump in then to some specific questions and maybe leave it to Alok and Cindy to respond. And maybe I'll give a couple up front that you all can respond to as quickly as you can. And all really great ones here. But just to pick out a few. Someone asked a question back on the journey when you were talking about how long it lasts to go from stage 1 to 5. And is there, it's shown on the slide as kind of a timeline, and someone asked the question, is there a set period of time by how long one might stay in a stage? And so, look, maybe you can address that. And at the same time, another great question early on about the segments, about age. And did you, is there an age variation in these segments, or in general, are the age bands similar for all three? So maybe if you could give us a sense of journey timing and age banding.
Sure. So, maybe I'll start with the second question because it does tie into the first one as well. So in general, when we looked at the segmentation, demographics, age across the three segments does not necessarily have a big difference. In fact, partially this is a behavioral segmentation, so it's a lot more driven towards their goals and needs. So you actually see the same age group between the three segments, the same kind of median kind of averages across the three segments. That said, the stage 1, which is now getting to the first question about the journey, right? The stage 1 might be more likely to be populated by the younger group, right? So women who are probably under 18 or not yet adults, you're likely to find more of them in stage 1 as compared to the other stages. But that's, again, not necessarily segment-specific, but more stage-specific. Now, in terms of progression through the journey, it's a question that we also keep debating. We've actually tried to attempt to see whether we can actually run a quantitative kind of a measure to see that's something that we can find. So far, what we are seeing is this, that we are this is not set on time, so time is actually not on the axis of that journey phases. What you see is more opinion milestones that they are reaching. What we see is that different women are reaching them differently, so it's not necessarily that there's a set age gap or there's a set lifestyle gap between the two ages. In fact, you might see a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old who's progressed to stage 3 as compared to a 20-year-old who's still at stage 2. So we're not seeing that so far on the journey. But so the alternative therefore then is not to look at age, but then look at other different kind of criteria that we can use to see where the women are falling, and that's the kind of stuff that we're exploring. So yeah, there is no set age gap between the stages, and they do vary across all segments as well as within the segments.
Great. That's super helpful. Let me give a couple more simultaneously in the interest of time. One is really an interesting one. Is it possible to see mixed characteristics in one person? For example, could a self-seeker be mixed with affirmation-seeking habits? And so can someone kind of inhabit parts of two different segments? And that was one question. And the other came early on, a really important question, is as it was presented up front, the model seems to assume that women have autonomy and control over their lives. And someone asked, for a poor young woman who might be engaged in transactional sex to survive, how might she make a flip? What conditions can be changed so she can make that flip? So I wonder if you can take both of those on.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of characteristics, right? So it's a very interesting question. In fact, when you look at these three set of women, right? All these three goals that we talk about: respect, affirmation, lifestyle. It's something that you might think all of us want, right? So these characteristics exist for every one of us, including everybody who's probably on this webinar today, including me. But I think what we are trying to see here is not that there is an absence of characteristics. It's more about what is most important. How are they prioritizing? So, and a lifestyle seeker is prioritizing functional needs over affirmation, and whereas an affirmation seeker is discounting the functional needs over our affirmation needs. The other way to also look at is how are they interpreting the same kind of behavior. So when I'm getting a gift, say from a partner, it's not that affirmation seeker or respect seeker is not getting gifts. They're also getting gifts. It's just that they are using that, interpreting that as a way of, this is how, this gives me respect. The fact that he's willing to give me gifts, what I ask for, is a way of him to show respect, whereas for a lifestyle seeker, that's not how she interprets it. So you think of it as prioritization and an interpretation, not necessarily saying that these characteristics do not exist for the other segments. Yeah, in terms of there is autonomy and agency. So I think I don't think we're saying that these women are rich or that they have all the money and they're just going out. They have everything that they need. What we are trying to say is that they are making choices. So they have agency. It's not that they completely lack agency. So yes, of course, if they are choosing to have transactional sex in order to satisfy some goals that they have, that's a choice that they are making. And then therefore our job is not necessarily to therefore helping them make better choices or make better decision making. So I think that's all we are trying to say. We're not necessarily saying that they have rich or they have money. It's more about the fact that it's still a choice. It's still an active choice. So they have that agency, and our job is to kind of help them make better choices.
Great, and really super helpful responses. And again, I know we're going to be running a bit out of time, and there are going to obviously be many more conversations. And we had a couple come in that actually may be a good way to talk about what comes next, both Alok and Cindy and Sean, and perhaps even Annabelle too. Let me try to get to a series of these in combination, and that is basically how do you recognize women in these segments so we can target communication? So you've defined three distinct segments back to Mary's early talk. So the question being, so what do we do with that? And a related question, very similar, how do we turn these insights on the segments into actions that can reach different segments? And wondering if these messages might be tailored for one segment or another, but what happens if a woman in another segment is exposed to that? Will it resonate? Could it possibly be counterproductive? So that's obviously a big part of, I know, the next steps that we want to be doing in this work. But maybe a bunch of you can chime in on how do we transition from segments to action, and what are those actions? What could those actions look like? Who would like to kick off?
This is all. I mean, I'm happy to start if you.
Go ahead and start. Go ahead.
All right. So maybe the next step slide right at the end might be useful to kind of just put up for the group. But part of the segmentation, as we have all talked about segmentation here, is to come up with a segmentation typing tool, right? So it's something that we developed at the end of the quantitative research that we're discussing today. We're actually right now in the field testing and validating it. So this segmentation typing tool is basically going to help us. It's basically a series of questions, right? So when you ask a series of questions, you understand whether a woman is in one segment or the other, and also where she is in the journey. So like I said, so we also are trying to figure out that it's not just the segment that she is in. We also want to make sure that we understand where she's progressing in the journey. So that's a tool that we are going to create at the end of this, as part of this project, and you should see that coming out during the strategy phase that we are going to get to. In terms of how do we turn these insights into actions, that's essentially what we are now going to move into. So the screen that you're seeing right now, you see that we are still in the middle of the project. So the discrete choice modeling is going to end, and we are going to get into the strategy phase, which is essentially about, we've learned so much. What does this mean from what is the programmatic implication? How will someone use it? There is also a set of a phase which we call as strategic tools. And the idea here is that not only are we going to create our own interventions, but we want to create a set of tools that people can use. Anybody who's in the field who's trying to implement this research or is trying to implement parts of this research can then use these tools to say, this is what it means for my program. So it's almost like a set of design guidelines, design tools for implementation teams to able to translate this for their own programs, for their own context. At the same time, we are also going to do that. So the prototyping and piloting phase, which is right at the end, is essentially about developing concepts, developing solutions, and then even actually piloting, almost like a proof of concept to see how effective this is. And that question is actually very interesting, right? The fact that would a person be exposed to, could it be counterproductive if they're exposed to the wrong kind of message? That's actually a good test to have once we get to this phase of the project.
Great. And maybe, Sean, I know we're toward the bottom of the hour, but Alec's done a great job of describing some of the next steps, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to open up and talk about kind of what people can expect coming next as we go through the next 6 to 9 months.
Sure, Mitchell. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Great. Good. So colleagues, I won't repeat what Alec has gone over, but just want to say that our one metric across this entire project, elaborated very well in discussions with Gates at the beginning, was to develop things that are practical and useful and concrete, and to get them in the hands of people who can use them. So that has been our lens from the outset and continues to be our lens as we move into strategy, tools, prototypes. We are going to be going into these phases with that in mind, but we also welcome your feedback on that. So we've engaged a wide range of stakeholders here in South Africa, and we'll continue to do that on what you would find useful. But if any of you on the line have a particular interest in giving us input on what you would find useful, please don't hesitate to contact me. I think we'll leave the final slide up with my contact information, or you're welcome to get in contact with anyone at AVAC and they can point you in the right direction. But very sincerely, we want to turn this into something that all of you find useful in your day-to-day work. So please help us to do that, and we certainly welcome your involvement.
Thank you so much, Sean. That's great, and I really appreciate it. And all these contact details will be there. I do think Annabelle, who leads our overarching marketing activities within the Prevention Market Manager project, I think wanted to say something. And I was thinking, actually, Annabelle, I'm not sure what you were going to say, but to loop it back to some of the VMMC work that we've always been in, that you've been engaged with, that might help connect some of those dots. So maybe, do you want the last word? Annabelle? *7 to unmute if you are still there.
Hello,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Can hear you now.
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and thank you to the great presenters on this. to just loop back to what Mitchell was saying, we learned a lot from the VMC project, which I think some of you on the line might be familiar with or not, but it was a fantastic project that had very similar guidelines and ambitions to what we've currently got under this one. It was a bit easier because there's an endpoint with VMC, which there's not with prevention. But I think the trick was to translate very, very layered, very complex learnings into something that was usable, and it's something that we achieved both in Zambia and Zimbabwe, and that was my previous job with PSI. I'm sorry, and something that the PSI team is continually achieving through the development of these tools. So we've learned a lot from that particular project, and we've built on it a lot. And we are, alongside with the team that you guys have heard about from, we also have an advisory board which has got a number of implementers on it who are also guiding our ability to really respond to the field, and we are showing the work in real time. So again, we're getting very much, to echo Sean's point, we're getting very much real-time input into the project. We're not waiting to the end. We're wanting everybody to come back to us and say, this is what we need. And the interventions are not just going to be communications-based. That, we did learn again with VMC that the interventions were very much about how do we talk to these people, and how do we structure perhaps our community healthcare workers in a manner that makes more sense? How do we communicate really difficult concepts? It's not just about messaging, it's about how do we really reach these people, the target audience that we're after in a way that resonates with us. And because we're going to be able to identify both what phases an adolescent girl and young woman is in and what stage she's in and what segment she's in, our ability to be very focused and really get messages that are very relatable to her and help her move along and help her engage are going to be really important. So we're not going to be hopefully producing messages that are just a one-size-fits-all, but to bring in Mary's point, to really talk about to them in a manner that matters to them, which
Great.
is going to affect impact. Which is going to affect impact. Sorry, that was what I was going to say. Thank you.
Great. Annabelle, thank you so much. And Sean, Cindy, Alok, and Mary, a terrific broad sense of where things are now and where it's going. And so important that this is not an exercise that is academic. This is one that is meant to be quite practical. We hope it is. It still needs to become even more practical. And to pick up on what both Annabelle and Sean said, many of the what comes next, the messages, the programs, are not to be done by AVAC and the Market Manager Project alone. They are meant to be a shared really tool, global tool, public tool for all to adapt and use as needed. So we look forward to many more opportunities to work with all of you. Apologies, I know we didn't get to a couple of questions at the end, but we will follow up and post all of this. I also wanted to say, and again, just to perhaps over-connect the dots, whether we're talking about a young woman being able to access a vaginal ring or oral prep or making any other kind of decisions for a healthy lifestyle and relationship, it's not just about PrEP, it's not just about HIV prevention. And just as flagged on Thursday, we have another webinar coming up on a very different topic but related in the sense of vaccine hesitancy and the implications for HIV vaccine development, but also for the global AIDS response. And whether we talk about HIV or measles, whether we talk about oral PrEP or a vaccine, understanding how people come to messages, come to services, how the global health community serves them, and how we address many issues that are beyond a health system and beyond a health worker is really critical. So a bit of a tangent here, but wanted to flag that for people on the line. Again, my great thanks to Mary and the Gates Foundation for today, but also for the strong support of the program, to Alok and Cindy and the whole Final Mile team and their collaborators in getting us this far, and to Annabelle and Sean and the whole Market Manager team with AVAC and CHI to make sure that we can actually apply all of this work to accelerate our collective impact. If you do have questions as we put up, feel free to email us at AVAC or Annabelle or Sean directly. Thanks very much and have great evenings, afternoons, or mornings still. Cheers all.